Imagine waking up one day to discover that everything you've ever wanted, your dreams, your ambitions, your potential, is locked behind a door. A door that you've had the key to all along. You've spent years trying to find the right path, struggling against obstacles, blaming circumstances, and yet, in the end, it's not the world that's keeping you from greatness. It's you. What if I told you that the one thing holding you back is something you've always thought was essential to your survival, your identity, even your success? What if the very force that you've believed defines you is actually the one thing that kills your potential? I know it sounds unsettling, but stay with me. Because here's the paradox. We are all taught that the ego is necessary. It's the voice that pushes us to achieve. It's the force that tells us who we are and what we can do. We believe the ego is the key to unlocking our potential, the engine driving our ambition. But what if this very engine is the one sabotaging everything you've worked for? You've probably heard it before. The ego is the enemy. It's a cliché now, a throwaway line thrown at people in self-help books or motivational speeches. But what if this statement isn't just some motivational fluff? What if it's the core truth of our struggle? Think about it. Every time you feel frustration, every time you feel insecure or threatened, every time you self-sabotage, that little voice inside, your ego steps in to protect you. It tells you that you're not good enough, that the world is out to get you, that others are better, smarter, faster. It convinces you that it's not your fault, that it's the external forces that are holding you back. But is it really the world that's your enemy? Or is it the way you view the world, shaped by an inflated sense of self, constantly defending its fragile image? This is the riddle you need to solve. The tension lies between the potential you know you have and the constant mental chatter that convinces you otherwise. What if the reason you haven't reached your potential is because your ego, disguised as your protector, is silently killing your chances at greatness? Before you brush this off, I urge you, take a moment to reflect. When was the last time you truly felt free, without self-doubt, without the weight of comparison, without the anxiety of measuring up? And more importantly, when was the last time you stopped and asked yourself, what would I be capable of if I didn't have to constantly fight against myself? You see, the ego is the hidden killer of potential. It wraps its chains around your dreams and thoughts, forcing you into patterns of behavior that keep you trapped in mediocrity. You think you're playing the game of life, but the game is rigged, and the person rigging it is you. The question then becomes, how do we break free from the prison we've created within ourselves? How do we silence the ego that controls our every move and find the true path to growth and fulfillment? But before we explore the answer, let's first dig into why this problem exists in the first place, and how deeply it's rooted in our psychology and society. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, because the journey we're about to take isn't just about understanding the ego, it's about breaking it and unlocking your true potential. Let's begin. Why does the ego, this silent and invisible force, hold so much sway over our lives? To truly understand this, we must dig deep into the hidden psychological and philosophical layers that shape human existence. It's not enough to simply acknowledge that the ego is holding us back. What we need to understand is why it's so powerful in the first place. At its core, the ego is a construct, a mental mechanism that has evolved over centuries to protect us. It's a byproduct of our survival instincts, designed to defend our sense of self from the chaos of the world. But while this protection was once necessary for physical survival in a hostile environment, it has evolved into something more sinister, something that prevents us from growing beyond our limits. Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist, understood this dynamic better than most. He referred to the ego as a part of the psyche that seeks control, structure, and definition. It is the center of our conscious awareness, the I that thinks, feels, and perceives. However, Jung argued that the ego is not the whole of who we are. It's just a small part of our greater psyche, and its role in the grand scheme of our lives is much more limited than we realize. The ego, according to Jung, often blinds us to the deeper aspects of ourselves, the unconscious mind, the self, that holds the true potential for growth, creativity, and wisdom. We become so attached to the ego's small, limited version of reality that we fail to recognize the broader, more expansive potential within us. In a sense, the ego is like a fog, obscuring the true nature of who we are and what we're capable of. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, took this concept even further. He famously declared, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge." The ego feeds us a steady stream of illusions of control, superiority, and certainty. It convinces us that we know who we are, that we have all the answers, that we are separate and superior to others. But these illusions trap us in a cage of our own making. Nietzsche also warned against what he called the slave morality, a set of societal values that reward submission, humility, and conformity, all of which feed the ego's desire for external validation. We live in a world that constantly reinforces the ego's need for approval and status, driving us to seek external markers of success, wealth, power, recognition, while disregarding the deeper call to authenticity and self-expression. Aldous Huxley, in his exploration of the human mind, described the ego as a filter that distorts reality. He argued that it creates a tunnel vision that prevents us from seeing the world as it truly is, one where everything is interconnected and fluid. Huxley believed that through practices like meditation, self-inquiry, and psychedelic exploration, one could break free from the ego's grip and experience a higher state of consciousness. But for most people, the ego remains firmly entrenched, controlling our every move and decision. The existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre made a profound observation about the nature of self-identity. Sartre argued that we are not born with a fixed essence, rather we create ourselves through our actions. The ego, however, seeks to solidify our sense of self into something permanent, something unchanging. This desire for stability and control often leads to a constant internal struggle, as the ego resists change and growth. Sartre's vision of human freedom lies in our ability to transcend the ego and embrace the fluidity of existence, something that the ego by its very nature cannot accept. And then there is Viktor Frankl, who in the darkest hours of his life, during his time in Nazi concentration camps, came to a profound realization. Frankl observed that even in the most dire of circumstances, there was a space between stimulus and response, an opportunity for human freedom. He believed that this freedom lies in our ability to choose our attitude toward life, even when everything else is taken away from us. The ego, Frankl suggests, is a prison that keeps us from recognizing this freedom. It locks us into patterns of reactive thinking, preventing us from embracing true agency and self-determination. So what does this all mean? It means that the ego, this sense of I that we hold so dear, is not the reliable friend we think it is. It's not the protector we believe it to be. In reality, it's a deeply ingrained psychological mechanism designed to maintain a false sense of security. But in doing so, it keeps us stuck in a perpetual cycle of self-doubt, defensiveness, and dissatisfaction. The more we cling to our ego, the more we restrict our growth and potential. But this is just the beginning of the story. We've only just started to scratch the surface of the true power the ego holds over us, and we've yet to uncover the unseen consequences it has on both our personal lives and our society as a whole. The tension you're feeling right now is no accident. It's the pull of something deeper. The more you learn about the ego, the more you'll start to question everything you thought you knew about yourself. But before you dive deeper, let's pause and reflect. How does the ego influence your own life, your decisions, your relationships? Stay with me, because what we uncover next will take everything you've believed about the ego and turn it upside down. Now that we've explored the psychological and philosophical roots of the ego, it's time to face an uncomfortable truth. The ego's influence isn't just abstract theory or philosophical musing, it has profound and often unseen consequences in our everyday lives. These consequences affect the way we think, feel, and interact with the world around us, and they silently shape the reality we live in. The ego operates beneath the surface, often so deeply embedded in our consciousness that we don't even recognize it for what it is. Its influence is like a shadow, always present but rarely acknowledged. It shapes not only the way we see ourselves but also the way we interpret everything around us, our relationships, our ambitions, our challenges. And what's more, it actively works to keep us from seeing the truth of our situation, creating a distorted reality that can trap us for years. The first of these unseen consequences is the constant battle for external validation. In the modern world, where social media has made comparison a daily ritual, the ego thrives on likes, shares, and comments. It craves attention, admiration, and approval from others, using these as a barometer of self-worth. But in reality, this constant need for external validation is a trap. It keeps us tethered to an illusion, an ever-changing metric of success that has little to do with who we truly are. Cognitive biases, like the social comparison bias, fuel this tendency. We compare ourselves to others, often measuring our value by how we stack up against them, whether in terms of appearance, achievements, or social status. This comparison is almost always unfair. It ignores the vast differences in context, experience, and internal struggles that shape each person's journey. Yet, the ego thrives on these comparisons, using them as a way to establish a hierarchy in our minds, convincing us that we must always measure up, always be better. This constant comparison eats away at our potential. We become obsessed with being seen and validated, and in doing so, we lose sight of the deeper, more personal motivations that could propel us forward. Instead of focusing on personal growth or authentic creativity, we shift our focus to what others think of us. We seek validation from the outside world, but the more we get, the emptier it feels. The ego, in its insatiable hunger for recognition, perpetuates a cycle of fleeting satisfaction, leaving us always wanting more. Another unseen consequence is the trap of perfectionism. The ego tells us that to be worthy, we must be flawless, unassailable, and untouchable. It convinces us that our worth is tied to our ability to succeed without failure. The perfectionist, driven by the ego, becomes obsessed with controlling every outcome, with never making a mistake, with appearing successful at all costs. This creates a dangerous cycle, as the ego's need for perfection leads to a constant fear of failure, which then paralyzes us into inaction. In fact, research on perfectionism shows that it doesn't lead to greater achievement or happiness. Instead, it leads to burnout, anxiety, and depression. The more the ego demands perfection, the more we lose touch with the process of growth itself, the learning that comes from mistakes, and the beauty that arises from imperfection. This suffocates creativity and stifles innovation, as we become obsessed with the idea of being right, rather than exploring new possibilities. Then there's the issue of self-sabotage. The ego, in its desire to protect the fragile sense of self, often convinces us to play small, to stay within our comfort zone, and to avoid the risks that could lead to true personal growth. It uses fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown, as a powerful tool to keep us from taking the very actions that could propel us forward. But this fear is often unfounded. It is simply the ego's way of maintaining control, of preventing the possibility of change. You may have experienced this yourself, that moment when an opportunity arises, perhaps a new job, a new project, a new relationship, and yet, despite your desires and aspirations, you hold back. Why? Because the ego whispers to you that you're not ready, that you'll fail, that you'll look foolish. It convinces you that it's safer to stay in your current position, even if it's unfulfilling, rather than stepping into the unknown. This self-sabotage keeps us stuck in mediocrity, reinforcing the very limitations that the ego seeks to protect. But perhaps the most insidious consequence of the ego is its ability to distort our relationships. The ego convinces us that we are separate from others, that we must compete, defend, and outshine those around us. It fosters a sense of scarcity, a belief that there's only so much to go around, whether it's love, success, or resources, and that we must fight for our place in the world. This creates division, resentment, and a lack of true connection with others. When we see others as threats to our own success or self-worth, we lose the ability to empathize, to collaborate, and to build meaningful, authentic relationships. We become so focused on our own needs and desires that we fail to recognize the humanity in others. This is a tragic consequence of the ego's grip on us. It keeps us isolated, disconnected, and alone, even when we are surrounded by people. But these consequences, while powerful, are not the end of the story. They are merely the symptoms of a much deeper issue. The real question we must ask ourselves is, why does the ego persist? Why does it continue to control us, even when we can see the damage it causes? The answer lies in the very nature of the ego itself. It's a force designed to protect us, to keep us safe from perceived threats. But what if the real threat is not external? What if the real threat lies within us, in our own inability to embrace uncertainty, to let go of control, to trust in the process of life? We are approaching the breakthrough now, the realization that will free us from the ego's grip and open the door to our true potential. But to break free, we must first understand the rebellion that is required, the radical shift in perspective that will set us free. Here's the moment when everything changes. You've seen the consequences, you've understood the psychological roots of the ego's control, and now it's time for the rebellion. A rebellion that isn't about fighting the world around you, but about breaking free from the invisible chains you've placed around yourself. The most liberating realization isn't about conquering external challenges, it's about freeing yourself from the prison of your own mind, from the very ego that has kept you trapped for so long. You see, most of us believe that to reach our true potential we need to fight harder, work more, and strive for perfection. We think that by controlling our circumstances, our outcomes, and our image, we can unlock the success we desire. But this is the ego talking. The ego tells us that we must assert dominance, that we must constantly prove our worth. It encourages competition, comparison, and fear. But what if the opposite is true? What if the real key to unlocking your potential is not about fighting more, but about letting go? The first step in this rebellion is to recognize that the ego is not who you truly are. It's a construct, a mental image, a narrative that you've built over the years to protect yourself from the unpredictability of life. But that's all it is, an image. The truth of who you are is far more expansive, far more fluid, and far more capable than the ego could ever conceive. The paradox here is that by letting go of the need to control, you actually gain far more control over your life. What does this shift look like in practice? It starts with the radical acceptance of imperfection. Perfectionism is one of the most powerful weapons the ego uses to keep you stuck, because it convinces you that your value is dependent on flawless performance. But perfection is an illusion. It's a moving target that can never be fully attained. And so, the ego keeps you running in circles, always striving for something unattainable. To break free, you must embrace imperfection, not as a failure, but as an essential part of growth. Imagine a world where failure wasn't feared, where mistakes were viewed not as threats to your identity, but as opportunities to learn. This doesn't mean lowering your standards or accepting mediocrity. It means freeing yourself from the need for external validation, and understanding that growth comes from experimentation, risk, and vulnerability. This is where the true rebellion begins, when you choose to step into the unknown, without the ego's safety net, and to trust in the unfolding of life itself. In that space of uncertainty, you will discover an entirely new source of power. By letting go of control, you gain access to a much deeper form of clarity and intuition. You stop fighting the flow of life, and instead, you begin to move with it. You stop being a prisoner of the ego's demands, and start becoming the creator of your own reality. Take, for instance, the examples of people who have radically transcended the ego's hold on them. Steve Jobs, for example, revolutionized the tech industry not because he tried to control every aspect of his company, but because he let go of the need for external approval. He followed his vision, even when it seemed impractical or insane, because he was more connected to his deeper sense of purpose than to his ego's desire for recognition. The same can be said for countless others, artists, entrepreneurs, philosophers, and spiritual leaders, who achieved greatness not by following the ego's rules, but by letting go of them entirely. This doesn't mean becoming passive or inactive. It means breaking the cycle of endless striving and shifting from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance. When you are no longer motivated by the fear of losing something, or by the desire to be better than others, you unlock an entirely different way of engaging with the world. You start to see challenges as opportunities, failures as lessons, and success as the byproduct of alignment with your deeper purpose rather than the goal itself. But there's a catch. This shift in perspective isn't easy, and it's not something that happens overnight. It requires constant practice and mindfulness. You must learn to recognize when the ego is speaking, when it's driving you to act from fear, pride, or insecurity. It takes conscious effort to silence the ego's voice and to connect with something deeper within, whether that's a sense of purpose, an inner calling, or simply the present moment itself. One powerful tool for breaking free from the ego's grip is mindfulness meditation. By training your mind to observe thoughts without attachment, you can begin to untangle yourself from the ego's constant chatter. In moments of stillness, you'll start to notice how often the ego tries to assert its dominance, telling you who you should be, what you should do, and how you should feel. But with practice, you can learn to observe these thoughts without identifying with them. You can create space between the thought and your reaction, and in that space, you discover your true power. Another key tool is self-compassion. The ego thrives on self-criticism, on judging yourself harshly when you make mistakes or fail to meet expectations. But self-compassion allows you to break the cycle of self-judgment. It helps you recognize that you are not your mistakes, and that you are worthy of love and acceptance just as you are. By treating yourself with kindness and understanding, you free yourself from the ego's grip of shame and guilt, and you create a fertile ground for growth and transformation. The rebellion is about reclaiming your true self, not the image that the ego has crafted over the years. It's about stepping into your power, not as an individual who needs to compete with the world, but as a person who is fully aligned with their inner purpose. This rebellion requires courage, but the rewards are beyond measure. Here it is, the ultimate realization that will completely shift your perspective. The ego, this powerful force that has shaped your reality, is not your enemy. In fact, it's a part of you, a tool you've developed for survival. But it is not the whole of who you are. The truth is this: you are not the ego, just as you are not your thoughts, your mistakes, or your fears. Your potential, your true self, exists beyond the ego's narrow scope. It exists in the space of pure awareness, where you are free from judgment, comparison, and control. The more you let go of the need to defend and protect the ego, the more you allow your true power to emerge. The paradox is this: by surrendering the need for control and external validation, you gain access to a limitless source of creativity, insight, and strength. The freedom you seek isn't something you need to achieve. It's something you need to recognize within you. Once you realize that your ego is just a mask, a defense mechanism, you can embrace the deeper, more authentic aspects of yourself. And in doing so, you unlock the true potential that's been waiting to emerge all along. So ask yourself, what could you achieve if you weren't bound by the ego's limitations? What would your life look like if you embraced imperfection, let go of comparisons, and trusted in the process of growth? The answers to these questions hold the key to your freedom. If you found this exploration valuable, don't forget to subscribe. The journey of self-discovery and breaking free from the ego's grip is one that will continue to unfold, and we'll dive even deeper together. Subscribe now, and let's continue to unlock the full potential of your mind and life.